Thank you. The first thing I want to say is our grateful thanks to Hashem for bringing us to this day. Throughout the last few months, there were times we thought we would never get to this day with COVID and everything. So thank you. Just so pleased that we've made it. I'm co-chair of this lovely synagogue, something else for which I feel very blessed and I'm very grateful. And I'm absolutely honoured to welcome here today, I think 6 years after your previous visit, Chief Rabbi Mervis. We're absolutely delighted to have you here to celebrate our 70th anniversary with us. We're also very privileged to have our local mayor, Councillor Edgar Hill. He's Mayor of St Albans District. And it's also a pleasure, I'm going to tell you who's on the top table, to welcome Professor Andrew Eder, who is a trustee of the United Synagogue. He's representing the organisation's president, Michael Goldstein, who unfortunately couldn't be with us today. At the other end of the table, we have Dr. Stephen Wilson, who is chief executive of the United Synagogue. And unfortunately for him, he's been in charge of all the COVID stuff. So if he's looking a little tired, you'll understand why. And for those of you who aren't familiar with anyone else at the top table, though you should be, at the end is Daniel Agassi, my co-chair. Mrs. Agassi, the lovely Claire, who has recently taken over social committee chair. Thank you. And in the middle, our very own rabbinic couple, Rabbi Daniel and Rabbi St Ali Sturgis, whom we are also very blessed to have in our community. Oh, unanimous! How's that? That's marvellous. That's marvellous. So fantastic. So that's everybody at the top table. But I'm also extremely grateful to see so many of you here today. Not only our present members, but those of you who are the children and grandchildren of founder members. And I know Hazel Kite sat over there with the Josephs, a founder member, the Laholt boys, not so much boys anymore, I'm sorry, but and you will see the stone outside was laid by their late father. We have Victor Harris, Gillian Newman, and Stephen Grabina. So we welcome all of you. It's just so lovely to see the shul full for a celebration and to see so many of you. And I think we're live streaming the event as well, so we welcome all those people too. I have to say, I'm extremely proud of our community and our 70th anniversary committee, headed by our Vice Chair, Jeanette Grenby, all of whom have made this event possible and had to consider all sorts of contingency plans because of COVID. So thank God that we are able to be here in person, so many of us, albeit with some of the limitations, although we did have a discussion on the top table about the wearing of masks while we're seated, and Stephen took his off. So we are following Dr. Stephen's example. I'd like to say just a couple of things about our little community in St Albans. I hope that you will all have experienced as you came in today what I hope we try to provide all the time, which is a very warm and affectionate welcome to everyone. So I hope you've all experienced that today. And I also think that what we provide in terms of our weekly learning, our charitable efforts in our wider St Albans community, I like to think that as a little shul and one of the United Synagogue's communities of potential, we punch above our weight. I like to think we do that, but no doubt you will all judge for yourselves. I look forward to at least our next decade, please God, and perhaps a refurbished building, dare I mention that today. We'd like, you can see there's an artist drawing of this building, very 1950s, obviously. I'd like to see something a bit more modern in due course. but so we can expand and continue on the work that we already do here. In the meantime, I'd like you to sit back, enjoy your tea and your reminiscing with each other, after which we're going to have a lovely, exciting and interesting video presentation for all of you for your entertainment. Before you do get started, may I just respectfully ask you, because we have the Chief Rabbi here and it's a security issue, that there should be no posting of anything on social media while we're in the event. What you do when we've left and it's afterwards is fine, but please not while the event is going on. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, while you're having your tea, please could you give your attention to our Mayor Councillor Edgar. Thank you.
Thank you and good afternoon, everybody. I thought I got away with that actually, but I was collared at the last moment. So I'm the 477th Mayor of St Albans, a tradition which goes back to the 1500s, and I'm very privileged to be in this exalted position this year. When I turn up at these functions, there's normally parking provided and I'm ushered in. So there was a space outside and a rather burly security chap. I thought, that must be for me, since I'm the Mayor. Says, no, that's for the ambassador and the security team, and if you don't move on, I'm going to have to shoot you. So I was firmly put in my place, but I'm delighted to have been invited to spend the afternoon with you and bring greetings from the City of St Albans, who thank you for your contribution to our community. The Remembrance Day Parade, Holocaust Memorial Day, helping clear the River Ver, and interfaith activities to help promote unilateral religious tolerance, to name but a few. I was at a friend's bar mitzvah. I haven't had many, not as many as I'd like, interactions with the Jewish community, but I did make some good friends away on holiday a few years ago, and I was invited to their friend's bar mitzvah, their son's bar mitzvah. And it was such an event that the ceremony itself was extraordinary. I really enjoyed it. The amount of studying that was involved, the young lad who was involved having his bar mitzvah, and what it must have cost the parents as well. It was quite an experience. So I'm glad to be able to be here today as well, to sort of widen those horizons. So it only remains for me to thank you once again on behalf of the St Albans City, as well as offering my personal admiration for everything you do. Thank you very much.
Oh yes. Unfortunately, no rest for the wicked, is there? Unfortunately, our local MP Daisy Cooper could not be with us in person, but you are about to see a video presentation.
Hello to everybody at St Albans United Synagogue, and a huge congratulations on reaching your 70th anniversary. I'm sorry that I can't be with you. This is of course a time for celebration, but as always we are acutely conscious that there is a rise in anti-Semitism, and I want you to know that as your local MP I will always stand with you against anti-Semitism and hate. Now, I understand that the Chief Rabbi is joining you today, which is hugely exciting, so I want to say congratulations and thank you to Rabbi Daniel and everybody else who's going to make today's event a huge success. Mazel tov.
It gives me great pleasure to introduce to you Karen Appleby, who was the first female chair of the United Synagogue, and this one. So it does give me pleasure to introduce Karen, and she's going to take you on a bit of a whistle-stop tour of the last 70 years of our synagogue. Enjoy.
Good afternoon, and a special welcome to all those joining us on Zoom. Like many communities around the world, we spent almost 2 years shut out of the building. Weekly talks, guest speakers, and even some services have had to move to Zoom. Some of these fitted naturally online, while others, such as weekly Havdalah and even Yisra services, took some getting used to. While these online experiences helped the community keep together throughout the COVID lockdowns, it's true that you don't fully appreciate something until it's gone. And having to close the shul has certainly given us a brand new appreciation for this building. I would like to take some time this afternoon to guide you through the community's history, important moments and key figures. In researching this presentation, we collected many fascinating stories, but as we're limited for time, we can only share a few of these memories with you. While we're here to mark the 70th anniversary of the building, I'm going to start by going back 120 years to the census of 1901, proving that there have been Jewish families in the area for a long time. These families, who had mostly come from Eastern Europe, worked in the clothing manufacturing industry as tailors and machinists. Some even made straw hats in Luton. These families were the original members of what was then known as the St Albans Hebrew Congregation. They didn't have a dedicated building like we've got today. Instead, during those early decades, a Sefer Torah was housed in a community member's front room. And this was where they conducted Shabbat and Yom Tov services. They even had kosher food brought in from London. This was the first Jewish community in Hertfordshire, leading the way for others, which have subsequently become some of the largest in the country. In the early 1930s, the number of Jews in the area began to increase. The new arrivals soon joined the existing families for social and religious activities. As their numbers grew, services moved out of the front room and into the Labour Party headquarters in Alma Road, the main road just around the corner. A further new wave of families came to St Albans to escape the war-torn London. They were an enterprising group, opening a number of businesses. Like those that had been in the area earlier, many of them worked in the clothing business, but this time predominantly as retailers rather than manufacturers. They were also furriers, jewellers, confectioners, hairdressers, and even a fishmonger, quickly integrating themselves into the life of the city. Once again, the community outgrew its current home and began looking for something more permanent. In 1942, the community paid the princely sum of £1,500 to buy a large private house, 54 Clarence Road, again not too far from here, in which to hold their services. While this worked for them throughout the year, attendance is always much higher on the high holy days, proving nothing has changed. And they had to hold the services either in the town hall, which is now the St Albans Museum, or in a dance hall above the shops in Victoria Street. It was a busy and thriving community with a Sunday morning cheder for children, a cultural society, a youth club, a sewing group, a library, and a ladies' guild who had provided the furnishings for the new building. Among our guests today are some who were children and teenagers during this time, who still remember that period with great affection. As part of these anniversary celebrations, Jeanette Grenby, our Vice Chair, has interviewed some of our members, both past and present, so they can share their memories with you. The first of these is Hazel Kite, who's going to tell us about how her family came to St Albans, about the laying of the foundation stone and other shul activities.
I came with my parents, my Bubba, my two single aunts, S and Gert, and my Auntie Rosie and Uncle Izzy, who were the Grabinas, with their two sons. And we were shortly followed by my Uncle Sam and Auntie Katie and their 4 children. You know, the foundation stone, we junior members made up a choir, and I've got the worst voice ever. We were actually outside the lines of where the synagogue is. If you imagine going into the synagogue, we were outside the windows on the left-hand side. I don't remember how many of us there were, but I do know that my friends Gillian, Kaufman that was, Maureen Hausman that was, and myself wore identical hats. This was the year of the Robin Hood corduroy hat with a feather at the side. Mine was in yellow, Jill's was in red, and Maureen's was in green. And I can also remember one of the songs we sang, because I sing it every Pesach, being one of the few that I really know well. Odecho ki anisoni vatili li shuo. Rabbi I remember was Rabbi Landy, who we always regarded as our family rabbi. He married us and many other members of my generation when he went on to his next shul. But I was very, very fond of him. He was a lovely, lovely man. Also attended both my parents' funerals, so I say very much our family rabbi. Then Rabbi Chaitovitz, we were all very close to as well. When the shul was in Clarence Road, the rabbis had the upper half of the premises as a flat, and that's where they lived. I used to teach in the Cheder when it was at the Oswald Road premises. I wasn't very good, but I must say I only had the first classes, so my Bert and my Doe are absolutely superb. And the second half, I used to do the Bible stories with them and let the children act out. And we had a youth club, which we all absolutely loved going to on Sunday afternoons. And when we wanted to rename it, it was called, the one who won the name was Tikva, for hope, from the Hatikva. And that was Helen Pomerantz who came up with that name. Right, I particularly remember the Hanukkah and Purim parties that we used to have in the shul, always fancy dress at Purim. And Philip Harris, I remember him coming as an absent-minded professor with pince-nez glasses, a top hat, a very suitable long jacket and no trousers.
As Hazel has just told you, the house in Clarence Road served a second function, being the home for the community's rabbi and his family, the first of whom was Rabbi Maurice Landy. After the war, the number of Jewish families in St Albans declined a little, as some families chose to return to London. However, many of them had laid down roots in the city and established businesses, and so decided to stay. In 1948, while the Jews around the world got ready for the establishment of the Jewish homeland in Israel, more locally, the Jews of St Albans began looking for their own new home. That January, the Jewish Chronicle reported that plans were being made to build a synagogue in St Albans. A building fund was set up, and whilst we don't have a record of how much was collected, how the land so close to the station was acquired, or how much the new building cost, what we do know is that it became the first purpose-built synagogue in all of Hertfordshire. It was also in this year that the St Albans Hebrew congregation, as it was still known, became affiliated with the United Synagogue and became St Albans United Synagogue. The chairman of the building fund, Louis Larholt, laid the foundation stone on the 5th of March 1950 at a ceremony attended by 300 people. This stone is still visible outside. The Larholt family had already generously donated a Sefer Torah to the community on loan for as long as the community remains under the auspices of the United Synagogue. I'm pleased to say that Louis' sons, Anthony and James, have joined us here this afternoon, and I'm sure they'll be happy to know their Torah scroll is still in regular use. And they have also recorded some of their memories for us.
Our father moved down to St Albans during the war, possibly even before the war, and because he had a couple of businesses in Luton, and he moved into St Albans, and Jimmy was born in 1943 and I was born in 1947, and our father continued to live in St Albans till about 1963, 64. When we moved to London. From the start, he was very involved in the founding of the shul, and also, incidentally, in Luton Synagogue. And he was very involved in both of those. and for many years he sort of was the senior warden, which, as it was a non-affiliated, or it was only affiliated to United Synagogue, meant that he ran the show basically.
There were morning services, there were Friday night services, and after a certain point, they used, if somebody was saying Kaddish, they would have a regular morning minyan at 7 o'clock in the morning. And I remember our father used to make us, in the school holidays, he used to make us come. He couldn't during term time because we were both at boarding school, so we weren't there. He'd let us out of bed at goodness knows what time. And
excuse me, it was before we went to boarding school, because in the tradition of the shul at the time, if we had 9,
oh, that's right, that's right,
and one 11 or 12-year-old, the 11 or 12-year-old was given the chumash to hold and was said, right, you're the 10th man. He was Jewish.
Oh,
And if they were short, one of us would be sent up to get him from the shop on a Shabbos morning, and he was very good. He used to just pack his stuff up and leave his staff in charge and come down to make up the minyan.
Bridge comes into it a lot, because at least 2 of his fellow wardens or fellow people who sat in the warden's box with him were bridge players. So bridge definitely came into it. There was a chap called David Geller and another chap called John Black, both very keen bridge players, as was our father. And I should mention also Mark Tree. He was very much involved on the religious side of the running of the synagogue, you know, selecting rabbis, making sure don't forget we had very young rabbis, and they were often quite inexperienced, and he would sort of set them on the right path.
I would say they were always very inexperienced. Most of them was their first ministry. And one of the things that I think occasionally I've spoken to people, when they hear I come from St Albans, they say, oh yes, that was a great breeding ground for some of the best rabbis that were produced. Because between Max Tree and Dad and Dave Geller, they would guide them and teach them how to run a community. And of course, with a very small community like it was, I mean, I don't think it ever got over 70 or 80 families in those days. It was something that the rabbi had a lot of independence and was able to do an awful lot.
Rabbi Newman, who was the rabbi at my bar mitzvah, which he left and went to got a job at Poets Road Synagogue in Hackney, and I went to his inauguration, and I think it was a senior rabbi, it might have been the chief rabbi, said St Albans has proved a very good training ground. I've got it written down. Those were the exact words he used.
Exactly 1 year after the foundation stone was laid, the newly completed synagogue was consecrated by Diane Harris Lazarus, formerly of the London Bethlehem. The Reverend, as he was at the time, Abraham Chesterwitz, also led part of the service. The then chairman of former management, Jack Harris, was given the honour of opening the shul. His son Victor has spoken to us about the opening of the new building and his father's work for the shul.
My father and his cousin David Geller, and I think probably Lula Holt as well, were the few Jewish people that Dad made contact with. And it was coming up, I don't think it was the first year, but I think it was probably 1940 when this was the first time we were going to have services for the new, you know, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And they decided to form a synagogue. And for some reason, I don't know how, my father managed to become one of the wardens. And I think he was chairman of the board. I was, I believe, the first person to be bar mitzvahed in Clarence Road, and that would have been when I was 13, it would have been 1943. And my younger brother Philip was the first one to be bar mitzvahed in Oswald Road. He took a very active role in the formation of in the buying of Oswald Road and in the formation of a new synagogue there. And he was therefore, he was awarded the honour of opening the synagogue and was presented with a golden key after he opened the synagogue. He was very proud of that golden key, and it was on display on the mantelpiece in the main lounge in a little box. When my father died, my two brothers and I decided that it would be nice to give the golden key that he was presented with when he opened the synagogue back to the synagogue to keep, because it was something to remember him by. And we spoke to the board of management, and they arranged a tea party for us to do that. And most of the previous ministers that had worked in St Albans attended that meeting.
In 1950, just before the building opened, the shul recorded having 96 members. However, bear in mind that at the time they only counted male members, so the real number would have been significantly higher. A decade later, in 1960, this had declined to 69 men, and in 1970 we were at just 49. What mainly contributed to this downward trend was that the children who joined their families a decade or two earlier had grown up, found work and socialised elsewhere, and moved away, with few, if any, younger members joining. The JC economist, Ben Azai, better known as Clyde Burnett, blamed it on the arrival of the motorway, which opened in 1959, writing, "Any hopes Lutherans and Albans may have of becoming viable communities in their own right have been killed by the M1.
Thankfully, he was wrong. As we've since seen, rather than civilization bypassing St Albans, the motorway, as well as the train lines, have meant people could live here and easily commute into London. Among our current membership, amazingly, we still have 3 children of those early days. Their grandparents were among the founders, but of course their memories of this time are mainly of their childhood. We can now hear from one of our current honorary officers, Howard Joseph, then from his cousin, Sheila Abrahams, and then from Ray Claret.
My grandparents were founding members of the shul, and my parents joined when they moved down to St Albans in the early 40s, and they were also very early members of the synagogue. I remember the synagogue being very full every time I went there, and I was very overawed by how many people were actually there. That's men and women and children, and how many relatives, that's people that I recognized in the synagogue, relatives of ours. There were, during the war, there were a lot of Josephs and family members, Grabinas, who were related to us, and other family members who were members of St Albans Synagogue. Can remember on Kol Nidre, they used to stop the service for the Kol Nidre appeal, and it wasn't done like it is today, where you have cards or you do an online payment to the Kol Nidre appeal. It was done by people putting up their hands and making a pledge, and the person at the end of the shul, or where the bimmer is, saying the person's name and how much they were going to pledge. So it was, it could probably been embarrassing, you know, to have to say I'm going to give £5 when somebody else might be willing to give 25 or 75 pounds, which was a huge amount of money in the 50s. When I was about 12, and I'd started doing training for my bar mitzvah, and we had a teacher at that time called Mr. Wolfson. I don't know what his first name was, but I remember he was Mr. Wolfson, and I remember going and doing some work for my bar mitzvah with Mr. Wolfson in the synagogue. I decided to become the financial representative when I was given the opportunity, really in homage, for want of a better word, to my grandfather, Sam Joseph, who was one of the founder members of the shul, and he and my grandmother also made certain gifts to the shul. One was a tablet of the 10 Commandments, which is on display in the shul hall. And they made other gifts to the synagogue over their time. But my grandfather was part of the original members who helped raise the money for the synagogue, and you know, make sure that it was all done and built in the early 50s. The only person I actually remember and was surprised to see when I rejoined was Raymond Claret, because I remembered him from Hebrew class.
Yeah, I was born in St Albans, and the synagogue was inaugurated 2 years before I was born. And I've been involved with the synagogue really all my life. My grandfather and his brother, my Sam Joseph, and his brother Joe Joseph were both founder members of the shul, and their names are on the board in the foyer. And in fact, all the men who are named on the board in the foyer, I remember very, very well. They were the wardens in my time. They were the wardens of the shul, and they sat in the wardens' boxes at Yom Tov, and as I remember, they sat there dressed very smartly and wore top hats. So they were very different days. When I went to shul, was laid out very differently to the way you've got it today. When I was a child, there actually was no real mechitza, because the only thing that divided the shul, the men's section from the ladies' sections, was red carpet. When it comes to the services in the shul, the regular services, they did have regular Shabbos services, as I remember. I don't remember being a regular shul goer on a Shabbos, but they did have meetings. I do remember very well the services at Yom Tov, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. The shul was full, absolutely ram-packed. And I do remember very, very well my cousin Henry Grabina on the bimmer calling out the notes for the shofar blowing. He did it so beautifully that even today, when I hear somebody calling out the notes, it's not that voice I hear, it's Henry's voice in my head that I hear, because he did it so beautifully. I also remember when I went to Cheder, Cheder at one time was held in the shul, and we just had tables out at the back of the shul for the different classes. It's difficult to tell you how many children there were at the time, but we were quite a big Cheder, and my mother, Edna Sampson, taught at the Cheder. My mother played a big part in the community. She was chairman of the Ladies Guild for many years, and she also oversaw what went on in the kitchen. I also remember, I have no idea what year, but Max Tree was very instrumental in with the shul, with the services. He was a lovely man, and I do remember when he died, they brought in the hearse. They brought the hearse to outside the shul to honour him on his way to Bushy. I certainly had no experience of large London communities at all, so I'm used to the lovely atmosphere that a small shul gives you.
When was my earliest memory recollection? I think I went, it's a long time ago now, it's nearly 70 years ago, but I think it was going to the shul on Shabbos with my dad. That's my earliest memory. And then also further along the line, I seem to remember we used to have Hanukkah parties and things like that. I do remember them. A memory as a child where we used to have an excursion to the seaside. I can just remember we went a couple of times, but we used to go to Jaywick Sands, very exotic, near Clacton, Essex, and it was great. I remember going on the coach with my parents, and I had a lovely time. I couldn't get over it. I was on the beach and playing around the water, and it was great. I had a lovely time. My real memory of my childhood is the Cheder. Now, the Cheder was quite a big event, really, from the point of view of the numbers. So the shul was not really big enough for that at all, not the layout. So they used the what's now the it's called a play school nursery in Alma Road, opposite Oswell Road, and it was quite a big building, different classrooms. I remember distinctly. We went there, and it was very good. In fact, they even coached in every Sunday pupils from Hemel Hempstead community, and I'm not quite sure what that was about, really. But the whole coach came every week from Hemel Hempstead. At my bar mitzvah, my mentor, my helper, the person who helped me was Henry Wilson, who had been headmaster at the Cheder, and he lived in Harpenden, which was very, very useful. So after school, once a week, I used to go to see him there. And then, so that meant then I was okay. So I went off, after a time, everything was okay. I went to Oban House with trepidation and got through. I'm sure they don't fail anybody. That's not the point. You don't know. So I went there. It was very exciting, really, with my mum. And so then Mitzvah came. I think I was shaking probably. The shul was full, and Rabbi Levy was there, and everything went okay. And also I got a book, a presentation from Henry Grabiner, who was then the president of the shul, for the occasion, which I've still got. And that was nice, yeah. That was my memory of my bar mitzvah. And once we got Rabbi Daniel here, wow. I mean, amazing difference. Plus, his there's a great effect on everything and everybody. And I think, people like going there. I'm not schmoozing Rabbi Daniel now, but it's a great inspiration. You want to go with someone like that there. It's a very, very interesting man, and I think that's helped.
During the 50s and 60s, the community had a succession of rabbis, each who stayed for only a relatively short time before moving on to larger communities. St Albans gained a reputation for being a good training ground for rabbis with potential. As I've already mentioned, Rabbi Chotovitz, who was there for the building's opening, stayed until 1952. He was followed by a further 4 rabbis, one of whom was Rabbi Isaac Newman. In 1958, one of our members presented us with 2 stained glass windows by the renowned artist David Hillman. We're very fortunate to be among the very few shuls to possess examples of Hillman's beautiful creations. This is probably connected to the fact that the artist was Rabbi Newman's uncle. The consecration of the windows was one of the last duties performed by Rabbi Newman before he departed for pastures new. Whilst I'd love for you to see the windows in their full resplendent glory, it's dark outside. So here's a photo instead. So it doesn't do them justice, but you can use your imagination to picture the sun shining through them. Incidentally, you might like to know that one of the middle windows was presented by a member of the Ratner family of jewellery shop fame. They started their business in St Albans, which developed into a nationwide chain of stores. Fortunately, their window has lasted longer than their business. Unlike his predecessors, Rabbi Newman lived in the house adjoining the synagogue on the corner of Oswald Road and Alma Road, which the community had purchased. The Board of Management later decided to sell the house to help pay for the cost of maintaining the synagogue. In hindsight, this was unfortunate, as the house recently went on the market and sold for just over £1 million, but it was the right decision at the time. The community's last rabbi for some time was Rabbi Philip Soman, who in 1967 unfortunately died at the young age of 39. It was to be another 50 years before the community felt that they were in a position to appoint another rabbi, but more on him later. Arriving in St Albans as newlyweds in 1965, Jeanette Grenby can tell us some of the community's other developments during those years.
Me and my husband here was the fact that my husband was working here. I thought I was coming to the edge of the world. It was the edge of the known world. Not a lot of people where I came from in northwest London had heard of St Albans. We went to shul on Yontiv, but I wasn't impressed with what I found there. It seems to me to be largely run by old men who were very set in their ways and weren't at all interested in being disturbed by young people like us or perish the thought children. Eventually time took its toll and the old men started to disappear off the scene, and those that were left became somewhat desperate, and so they turned to my husband and made him an offer he couldn't refuse. They said to him, if you join the synagogue, you can be on the board of management. My husband became honorary secretary for a number of years, and then I took over his seat on the board as soon as women were allowed. At the time we joined, the shul was really in the doldrums. Nothing much was happening, nothing much was going on. There were services from time to time, but not very much in the way of social life. But it was the Ladies' Guild who were the active ones, and I think personally that it was the Ladies' Guild who held it together at the time. They were organising jumble sales to raise funds. They were doing welfare work in the local mental hospitals, of which there were quite a few. Well, one thing that was happening was the formation of a Hearts Forum. This showed a bit of promise. It involved representatives from each of the shuls in the county getting together to discuss their problems and hopefully share solutions. One thing that benefited my family in particular was the Uncle Rabbi scheme. With most of the communities, the small communities in Hertfordshire, unable to afford a rabbi of their own, someone came up with this brilliant idea of an Uncle Rabbi. That meant that one of the rabbis from, a rabbi from one of the largest synagogues would be assigned to one of the smaller synagogues to keep an avuncular eye on them and help them out on special occasions. The rabbi who was chosen to help out at St Albans was Rabbi Alan Plansky. And I remember him coming out with him and his wife to officiate at the Shabbat service where our eldest son was bar mitzvah. And then he spent the rest of the day with us, of course.
Back in the 1960s, our shul had survived the establishment of a liberal congregation, initially based in St Albans, but later moving to Luton. In the late 80s, 3 families decided to break away and create a new congregation, which later became the St Albans Masorti Synagogue. Despite these occurrences, our community began to grow again, with one JC report declaring St Albans sails out of the doldrums, citing an influx of new families, both young and old, leading to a burst of renewed enthusiasm from communal leaders and an increase in the number of services. Over the decades, we have relied on people volunteering and stepping up to lead the community and its services. While there have been far too many people to name, and they've all made a long and lasting impact, there are a few who need special mention, without whom the community would have shut its doors a long time ago. The first of these is Henry Grabiner. In the years following the Second World War, Henry returned to St Albans to marry a local girl, start a family, and became an important figure in the community. He was instrumental in purchasing the land on which the building stands, and he held virtually every office and every duty in the shul, from repairing the building acting as our financial representative, to being warden, leading services, and becoming chairman of the shul. In the early 1990s, Henry was made honorary life president in recognition of his amazing and dedicated lifetime of work, the only person to have ever held this honor. Derek Wenzerall was on the board of management for 25 years, holding almost every position over that time, and many of them simultaneously. He was always the first to arrive at shul and the last to leave, and was always ready to undertake any maintenance tasks that arose. He was chairman for several years before retiring in 2013. As his vice chairman, I know firsthand how hard Derek worked to keep the shul going over some of our tougher years. I would also be remiss if I didn't mention his wife, Rosemary, who was our honorary secretary for many years. Thirdly, we should remember Lawrence Bamberg. As our warden, he brought in new initiatives which boosted attendance, and he brought a wonderful atmosphere when he led services, which we still remember fondly, and was an excellent chauffeur blower on the High Holy Days. During some of the lower points in the 90s, Lawrence was a central figure in keeping things going. In 1990, the experienced educator, Jonathan Gorski, moved to the city and offered his services for our services. Since then, Jonathan has become an integral and highly respected part of the community. For many years, he ran the services almost single-handedly and gradually increased their frequency, providing a significant and welcome improvement on what had gone on for the past few decades. More recently, he's been leading them in partnership with another member, David Solomon, and they continue to do so alongside Rabbi Daniel. Their dedication and expertise really has kept the shul going, and we can now hear from Jonathan.
I remember Malcolm Wiseman, who was Minister of Small Communities, telling me that I might like to help out with the synagogue, which was not doing too well at the time. And he also explained to me that in his view, what mattered in small communities was keeping the services going at all costs. There were very few services. In fact, we met but once a month for a Friday evening. Basically, St Albans at that time, and the contrast between then and now is quite unbelievable. St Albans was what you might call a 3 times a year synagogue for most of the members, with a small remnant who would come on a monthly basis. No one came on a weekly basis. And that there were usually about 3 or 4 gentlemen and occasional ladies present on Friday evening. In short, to see the synagogue now is a source of enormous joy for me, to see a synagogue with a rabbi, a rebbitzin, with a regular minyanim, with everything in good order, is incredibly precious. One of the most difficult things to achieve was the mechitza. It was very fascinating, the different attitudes to it and the problems that people had with the mechitza. And it was only really the coming of Rabbi Sturgis and the rebbitzin who managed to surmount the problem by creating a most extraordinary mechitza, which we now have. But eventually Malcolm Wiseman's prophecy proved correct. And having sustained the service, we now have a synagogue to go with it.
Chief Rabbi Jonathan Sachs of blessed memory first visited us to celebrate the 60th anniversary of the community in 1993. You may wonder why we're here for the 70th anniversary if 1993 was the 60th. But what was celebrated then was the actual establishment of the original community back in 1933. While today we're celebrating 70 years of having our own permanent home. During his visit, Chief Rabbi Sachs noted that St Albans was one of the most northerly United Synagogue congregations. He explained that the Hebrew word for north is saphon, which could also mean hidden treasure, which he called a most apt description for this small but special community. In 1998, Claudia Marks was the first girl to celebrate her bat mitzvah at the shul. Her father, Nigel, was chairman at the time, and we can now hear from him about the progress the shul was making.
And we moved to our very first house immediately after we got married in St Albans. And we've never regretted moving in this direction. And funnily enough, we went to the cinema, the then Odeon, the now Odyssey, in London Road, shortly after we got married, and happened to park outside the synagogue on Oswald Road. Well, we'd been members of Hampstead Shul for some years, that's where we were married, and we decided pretty well there and then to transfer to St Albans, and we've never regretted it. I mean, when we arrived, the services were very irregular. It was a community-led, the services were all community-led, and then a gentleman arrived, John Gorski, who started to lead our services, a wonderful man, a lovely man, but we had Shabbat, Erev Shabbat services, and I think at that time monthly Shabbat services. I have to say it was my privilege in, I think, the year 2000 when I was chair to introduce weekly Shabbat services, and that was, I'm very privileged and proud. I have to say one of my proudest moments was my daughter Claudia being bat mitzvah, the first bat mitzvah at St Albans United Synagogue in I think in 1994, and which was wonderful. That was a great privilege to be in the chair and see your own daughter bat mitzvah. All I would say is that during the 35 years or so, or 40 years that Leslie and I have been attending St Albans Synagogue, we've seen, you know, various ups and downs, and the congregation rising and falling. But I'm absolutely delighted that overall we seem to be rising exponentially now, and we're just delighted that the synagogue is garnering support now from a large number of the families who are moving into the area, increasing our membership, and it's just wonderful to see.
20 years ago, in 2001, we marked the 50th anniversary of the building by planting a biblical garden, the first of its kind in the country. Chief Rabbi Sachs officially opened the garden and planted a gum tree, which is still thriving today. Leslie Marks will tell us more about the biblical garden and how it came to be.
At the time of the 50th anniversary of our synagogue, we realised we had a secret gardener who we discovered lived just around the corner, and was Irene Jacobson. We were keen to mark the occasion in a novel way, and Irene enthusiastically headed a project to create a biblical garden, the first of its kind in Hertfordshire, which would also act as an educational resource for the Hayder and local community. Thanks to the generosity of our members, friends and other donors, including the Shell Better Britain campaign, many trees, shrubs, flowers and herbs were planted, all mentioned in the Old Testament and carefully researched by Irene. We held a communal dig and many volunteers came forward, including Mr. Rotivator, as one of our older members became known. Each specimen planted had a label with its name and biblical source affixed to it. As it is said in Genesis, Abraham planted a tamarisk tree in Beersheba. The tamarisk is a beautiful tree with plumes of pink flowers and is actually planted at the entrance gate to the garden. We grew palm, willow, myrtle and goodly fruit, or etrog, as our very own 4 species for Sukkot, horseradish and herbs for Pesach, together with olive, figs, a pomegranate tree, and we even had an old sink filled with bulrushes. This year, the vine has produced so many grapes, there could be a new Palwyn. The children planted their own section of the garden, and fun was had by whole families. I even wrote a song for the children to sing at the opening ceremony to the tune of an English country garden. We were delighted that Chief Rabbi Dr. Jonathan Sachs, of blessed memory, inaugurated the opening of the garden and, surrounded by children and members, planted a gum tree, which is still thriving.
In addition to the anniversary, 2001 was a landmark year for the community. We had 7 boys celebrating their bar mitzvahs, a clear sign of our changing demographics, with more young families having joined. It was also time to refurbish the building. We organised a complete reconstruction of the building's flat roof and ceiling, new window blinds, and even a new kitchen. Also, the old uncomfortable metal chairs, which many of you may have painful memories of, were replaced with the much more comfortable padded chairs you're sitting on now. After taking time to upgrade the building, we began looking at how to upgrade the community. In 2011, after much debate and discussion, the community, which now numbered 130 people, voted overwhelmingly to change our status from affiliate to become a full constituent member of the United Synagogue. We had always valued our independence, so this was a big step for us. However, we were pleased to be embraced by the warmth of the United Synagogue family. I was the vice chair at the time and was in charge of seeing this process through. I was quoted as saying, "We are delighted the United Synagogue shares our vision of the potential of the St Albans area as a magnet for Jewish families, wanting to combine the benefits of living in a tranquil and appealing out-of-town environment with the ease of access to London." 2 years later, the United Synagogue changed its rules on who could become a chairman of a shul. Previously, it could only be men, but now women could also lead their communities. In April 2013, I was elected as the very first female chair of a United Synagogue shul, with several other women elected in the following weeks. I led the community for 3 years and have since been followed by 2 other very successful women chairs, Leslie Marks and Alyssa DeCosta-Wardman. After 3 years as chair, Alyssa has recently been joined by a co-chair, Daniel Agassi, our first male chair in over 7 years. Until then, Rabbi Sachs' comments of us being a hidden treasure remain true. But we used this opportunity to publicise ourselves and raise our profile. My election was widely covered in the Jewish press. People beyond Hertfordshire now knew we existed, and membership started to grow. With United Synagogue support, we began looking for a rabbi who could build on this momentum. After a long and international search, we were very fortunate to appoint Rabbi Daniel and Rebbe St Ali. After 50 years, St Albans United Synagogue had a rabbi again. Chief Rabbi Mervis, you joined us almost exactly 6 years ago for Rabbi Daniel's induction. In the time he's been with us, the community has not only grown and thrived, but with a total of almost 300 members, has almost doubled in size. With 18 new members joining us this year between Pesach and Rosh Hashanah alone. As religious leaders, Rabbi Daniel and Ali have not just given the community a new lease of life, but have also brought a new energy to services, making them even more meaningful and enjoyable. They have reinvented our children's services and brought together the young professionals. Our calendars have been filled with their innovations, world-class guest speakers, lively discussions, a Rosh Chodesh ladies group, a growing cheder, trips abroad to Poland and Berlin, and so much more than I can say here. As we now look to the future of the community, I would like to introduce one of our younger members, Benjamin Agassi. As a teenager, he represents our future, and we can now hear what the community means to him.
Family moved to St Albans in 2012, but we didn't join the shul straight away. We were members of Luton Shul, which is where we moved from. However, we later did join St Albans community in 2016 when I was 11. At that point, I started cheder, but when Hayley, a friend of the family, took over as head, I was moved to a position of helping out, as I was older and went to a Jewish school, so I didn't have as much need to learn any more than sort of what we were being taught in school. It wasn't long after we joined that it came time for my bar mitzvah in 2018. I was taught by one of the leading members of the shul, David Solomon, who is currently our resident shofar blower and one of the leading lights of our community. It was so nice when the day came to see the rare occurrence of the shul to be packed to the brim on such a special day for me and my family. There hadn't been any bar mitzvahs for quite a while before mine, and it was 2 years until another bar mitzvah came around, and so I was sort of on my own in that position of being bar mitzvah age. The one thing that has come out of being part of the shul and of the community has been my fondness for challah baking, though I don't do it so much. When there was not only the great challah bake a couple of years ago, but before that, the community held a challah bake that sort of showed me my fondness for baking challah. And I never would have found that without being part of St Albans Shul and the community.
We've now reached the present day in this presentation. The most significant feature of the last couple of years has, of course, been the pandemic and having to close the shul for a prolonged period. But we adapted. As I said in my opening, thank goodness for Zoom. We couldn't meet for Shabbat services, but it gave even greater meaning to Kabbalat Shabbat and Havdalah, led by Rabbi Daniel. Thursday night, Whiskey and Wisdom over Zoom has become the highlight of the week for many. And we were able to have high-profile speakers who couldn't have made it to St Albans in person. We've managed to keep the community together and connected, but we are delighted that we've been able to hold services and events in person once again. Of course, we're not quite back to complete normality, as many of you have been watching this afternoon's proceedings online. But hopefully it won't be too long before we can all be back together again. So what does the future hold? As the community continues to grow, our home needs to grow with us, and we're making plans to expand and refurbish this 70-year-old building. Looking back over the 7 decades of the building and the 120 years of Jewish life in St Albans, our community is the biggest and most active it's ever been. From a small number of people meeting in someone's home, we now stand here, a proud and vibrant part of St Albans life. While it's important to remember where we've come from, we look to the future with optimism. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. I hope everybody enjoyed hearing the reminiscences of some of our older members. It was very interesting watching these two tables and, you know, people being mentioned, where is he, I can't see him. La Holtz, Ray Clarett's over there. Put your hand up, Ray, because they were looking for you and they couldn't see you. It's like, oh, that's him. Okay, you can chat later. It gives me very great pleasure to invite Rabbi Daniel to come.
Chief Rabbi, Mayor of St Albans, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, people outside. It's so wonderful to have so many distinguished guests and members and friends join us for this very special occasion of our 70th anniversary. In Judaism, the number 70 is very special. It seems as though in Judaism, most numbers are extremely special. But the number 70 in particular is very special because it appears time and time again throughout our Jewish sources. Just a few examples. We're told that there were 70 original core nations of the world and 70 original root languages, which have led to the wonderful diversity that we see in our world today. We were told that of Jacob's family, there were 70 members who descended to Egypt, endured slavery, and then emerged as the Jewish nation. Interestingly, there are exactly 70 holy days in the calendar which are biblically mandated. Those who are doing the maths already, I'll help you out. There are 52 Shabbats in the year, 8 days of Sukkot, 7 of Pesach, that's 67, and 1 day each for Shavuot, Rosh Hashanah, and Yom Kippur. They're the biblically mandated ones, not including rabbinical enactments. There's one more 70 which I would like to share with you this afternoon, which is of relevance to us today. The Torah gives us an instruction to respect and to honor our elders. There's an instruction in particular in the book of Vayikra Leviticus where it says, Mipnei Seva Takum. You should stand before a Seva, a Hebrew word which is difficult to translate, a person of mature years. So the first question is, how old does somebody need to be before they are a Seva, deserving of an additional level of honor? And why is there an additional level of honor due to such a person? So there's a Mishnah in Pirkei Avot in Ethics of the Fathers, and it goes through the various milestones of a person's life, and there it says, Ben Shivim La Seva, that a Seva is somebody who reaches the age of 70. And this person is deserving of extra level of honor. Why? Because they have experienced life. And life experience is to be treasured and honored. Life experience is something very valuable. Life experience is something that brings with it wisdom, the type of wisdom that can't be learnt from a book, can't be learnt at university. It's the wisdom of life. And so our community in this building has reached the significant milestone of 70, an age at which I believe it is worthy of an additional level of honor because of what it's experienced in its lifetime. The synagogue has experienced 70 years of Jewish life, 70 years worth of prayers within its walls, 70 years of the dedication and self-sacrifice of its founder members and chairmen and women, all the way from the beginning of the community until our co-chairs, Daniel and Alyssa, today. Also, I must mention the other past chairmen of my tenure, Karen and Leslie. It's seen 70 years of dedication and devotion of boards of management, of shul councils, of Kiddush rotas, of security volunteers, of welfare volunteers, all different types of volunteers who have made this community what it is. This synagogue has seen 70 years of participation in a variety of activities, from 70 years worth of men, women and children, members, friends, family and guests who have walked through these doors, including all of you who are sat here with us today, who have become part of the wonderful St Albans United Synagogue story. And all this makes our 70th anniversary so significant and special, and such a privilege to be a part of. I'd like to pay tribute to and express my gratitude for the founders of the community, the founders of this synagogue, and all those who have nurtured the community in the 70 years since. With particular gratitude to the Almighty for bringing us safely and healthily to where we are today. May we only go from strength to strength. May we always be a source of pride to our community, a source of pride to the city of St Albans, and a source of pride to the Almighty. Amen. It's now my very great pleasure and privilege to introduce the Chief Rabbi. I'd like to take this opportunity on behalf of all of us to thank the Chief Rabbi for his tremendous and inspirational leadership at the head of Anglo Jewry. Chief Rabbi, you're a much needed voice of compassion and morality in a very challenging world. For me, the Chief Rabbi is an outstanding role model in so many ways. He has an ambitious vision for the Jewish community and the role that we must play in the wider community. And at the same time, he expresses tremendous care and attention for individuals, something which I personally benefited from. Chief Rabbi, thank you for honouring us with your presence, and it gives me great pleasure to invite you to share some words with us now.
Good afternoon, everybody. So brilliant and wonderful to be here. And I still haven't got used to real live events with actual people in front of me. And I recommend that none of us should ever get used to it again, because it's a gift to be able to engage with people, to say hello, to shake hands, to be in the presence of others. And let's always remember the lessons of COVID well into the future. Rabbi Sturgis, you've just presented me with an enormous challenge. You don't know what it is. Well, the theme of my address to you today is the significance of the number 70. I was going to cite the Midrash Stutter, which mentions the 10 occasions in the Bible and in Jewish tradition. You've just done that. And the Talmud says, Dvarim hayotzim min halev nichnasim in halev. Words which come from the heart enter into the heart. So I'm just going to say words which come from the heart now. And I hope that they'll enter into your hearts. Yesterday in shul, we read about the origin of the term Jew. As Jews, we're descended from Judah. We read about the birth of Judah. And he was called Yehuda, Judah, because when he was born, his mother Leah declared, Hapa'am odet Hashem. On this occasion, I will give thanks to God. So from the word Todah comes Yehuda, and therefore, to be a Jew means to be grateful. That's the essence of our Judaism, to express our appreciation. And that's what I'd like to do today. I'd like to express appreciation to Alyssa and Daniel for your leadership of the community. Just amazing, together with everybody else who put this all together. I do very much remember that significant event 6 years ago, and some of my inductions have worked incredibly well, some not so well. This is one of my best successes. It was such a golden, wonderful moment, and I was kind of sitting around about here when your father came onto the pulpit. Do you remember that speech? Wow, it was incredible. And Rabbi Sturgis himself, in the way that he, from that moment, has brought all of you together. And what a marvelous name the two of you have. I want to thank you, not just for what you do here in St Albans, but for being so successful within the United Synagogue and well beyond. Incredible inspiration for so many people. And as Chief Rabbi, for me to come along to a community and to just sense the warmth that a community has towards its rabbinic couple and the appreciation. And also to hear about the incredible successes of what you've done. This is an amazing shiur, you know, and it takes two sides to make a shiur work. And I can say without any doubt whatsoever that you, the St Albans community, are so fortunate to have Rabbi and Rabbi St Sturgis, and Rabbi and Rabbi St Sturgis, you're so fortunate to have St Albans community. And may this shiur continue to thrive and to exist and to produce many more members and great vitality and incredible success well into the future. I'd also like to thank Dr. Stephen Wilson here representing the professional side of the United Synagogue, and for everything you, Stephen, do for me and for all of us within our organization. And Professor Ida coming here today representing the trustees. You know, I visit trustee meetings from time to time, and I'm in awe of the United Synagogue trustees. Nobody could appreciate the extent of the time that they invest and the talent that they put into running our organizations, and particularly bearing in mind the last 1.5 years, nobody could have been prepared for the experiences that we had at our trustees. It's just been amazing. Thank you so much, Professor Ida, for you and for what you and your co-trustees have done. You know, the mayor is gracing us with your presence here today. Thank you so much. Our appreciation is enormous. And I picked up on a comment of yours. You said you're the 477th mayor since the 1500s. You might find it interesting to know that I'm the 11th chief rabbi. That's the 11th chief rabbi since 1704. Isn't that amazing? Right? And there was only one gap of 10 years between two incumbents. And so, you know, for you, you've just got a year. And from what I hear, you're doing brilliantly. And thank you so much for being with us. And please thank, on our behalf, your council for everything that's doing and the warmth of the whole city of St Albans towards the Jewish community and the mutual appreciation that exists. I picked up on David Hillman's name being mentioned. I don't know if you're aware that David Hillman has a great nephew who will be visiting London next week. And I will be seeing him, and I will tell him that his great uncle has windows here. And this great nephew is, of course, Israel's president, Isaac Herzog, who is very proud of the stained glass windows which his great uncle has in quite a number of synagogues. Another thing that I've picked up on here today, and I want to express my gratitude to all you for, you're not a community, you're a mishpacha. There's a very special warmth here. It's fantastic, it's palpable, I can sense it, I can feel it. And great families know where they're coming from. They're rooted in their ancestry. They appreciate a journey. You don't just start a family at a particular point. You feel part of a continuum, and that's certainly what the story of St Albans is here, and what you've been watching, and the interviews, and the comments, and that sense of camaraderie, and it's just so marvelous. And I envy you for it, because in London we don't have communities like this, right? And I don't know if you appreciate the full extent of how lucky you are to be part of this community. I think you do, but it is something really, really special. So thank you for enabling me and our other visitors for being able to be part of what is here today. Now, Rabbi Sturgis, you didn't mention one of the significant features of the number 70. And it is very significant. It relates to the festival of Sukkot. On Sukkot, you can't hide your Jewishness. Because by definition, a sukkah is only kosher if it's open to the elements. You cannot have an underground sukkah. It has to be visible. And therefore, Sukkot stands as a festival which represents our Jewish pride. And indeed, the lulav represents the backbone of the Jew. We stand up and we announce to the world, we are Jewish and we're proud of it. But together with that, in temple times, during the festival of Sukkot, 70 sacrifices were offered. And the reason for the 70 sacrifices was in order to remember the 70 original nations descended from Noah after the flood. By bringing these 70 sacrifices, we recognize we're part of a unique nation, but we're also part of all of humanity. And we bring those sacrifices to recognize our universalistic aspirations, in addition to our particular identity. Sukkot therefore stands for what it really means to be Jewish, to be proud of our identity and to recognize that God created us as a people because he is the parent of every single human being, because every soul on earth counts. And that's what the number 70 stands for, and that's what you stand for. Proud to be Jewish, part of this mishpacha within the Kehillah, and at the same time, part of St Albans society, part of the world around us. And isn't that what COVID has taught us? That we need to look after ourselves, and by looking after ourselves, we're looking after everybody. I had a very interesting experience just over a week ago. I was up in Scotland for COP26, and I had the privilege of sitting down for a formal meeting, a one-to-one, with Prime Minister Naftali Bennett of Israel, who was also there. And the day after I got back to London, which was actually the day after my meeting with Prime Minister Bennett, one of the policemen who was looking after me tested positive for COVID. So immediately, the other policeman and I went for a test. And I was very worried. And what was worrying through my mind was as follows. I knew that Prime Minister Bennett flew to Israel later that night after seeing me, and the following morning had a meeting with his cabinet, and then was in the Knesset to pass the budget. So maybe from my policeman, I got COVID, I gave it to the Prime Minister, he gave it to the cabinet, and the whole of the Knesset would have COVID. Baruch Hashem, it didn't happen. The others tested negative, but it could have happened. It could have happened. Isn't that how COVID has spread? From one continent to the other. You see, if I look after the cleanliness of my hands, if I protect my health, I'm not just looking after me, I'm looking after everybody right around the globe. And that's the essence of our Judaism. We're proud to be Jewish, and at the same time, we're here as God's chosen people because he loves every single human being. And therefore, our compassion towards our fellow Jews is part of our overall compassion to and responsibility towards everyone on earth. And I know that that is very much an integral part of the philosophy and the outlook of this community, together with all of our communities within the United Synagogue. I want to conclude by telling you a story which never happened. So, 70 is a sizable number. It's great, but you've still got a long way to go. So a man in Jerusalem entered into the offices of an insurance company. He sat down in front of the clerk and he said, I'd like to take out some life insurance. And the clerk said, excuse me for asking, but how old are you? He said, oh, I'm 83. He said, no, I'm sorry. We can't give you a policy if you're already 83. He said, no, it must be possible. The clerk said, why? He said, because 3 weeks ago, my father was here and he took out a policy. The clerk said, how old is your father? He said, oh, he's 119. He says, gosh, well, I'll have to check up with my manager. Can you come back tomorrow? He said, I can't come back tomorrow. He said, why can't you come in tomorrow? He says, tomorrow we've got a family simcha. He says, what's happening tomorrow? He says, tomorrow my grandfather's getting married. The clerk says, your grandfather's getting married. How old is he? He says, oh, he's only 153. He says, 153, what an age at which to get married. Think nothing of it, said the man. He wasn't too keen, but his parents insisted on the show. Now, as developed and sophisticated as modern medical science is, we haven't yet reached that point. We're on our way. But shuls can reach that kind of age. In my 10 years chief rabbi already, I've officiated at the 250th anniversary of the shul, and the 200th and 175th. I flew to Cape Town, South Africa at the 175th anniversary of the original shul in the gardens in Cape Town. I've attended so many centenaries of buildings, of communities. 70 is very, very young. And from the sound of it, you're on the way up. You're growing, you're developing. And for an out-of-London community, that is something exceptionally special. And it hasn't happened just because of good luck. It's happened because of good leadership, good partnership, and a wonderful community spirit. So I want to congratulate you all and thank you all. And the last point I picked up on is that in 2 years' time, 2033, it will be the 90th anniversary of the founding of the community. Is that right? Yeah? So please invite me back. Coming to celebrating with you once again. Thank you so much for an incredible afternoon.
Chief Rabbi, thank you so much for your very kind words and all the lovely things that you said about our community. We are very grateful. I'm now going to introduce Professor Ida, who I was expecting. He's listened to Rabbi Daniel, he's listened to the Chief Rabbi, and he whispered to me, is anyone else going to say anything about 70? And I expected, while he's sort of making a few extra notes, that he was going to rip bits off of his notes, because so I expect he's going to be a bit short in what he's going to say. Professor Ida.
Chief Rabbi, Rabbi and Rebbits and Sturgis, Mr. Mayor, Dr. Stephen Wilson, honorary officers, local dignitaries, and friends all. Mazel Tov. Today we celebrate St Albans United Synagogue being 70 years young. I'm going to go off my notes for a moment, as Alyssa had said. You would have thought I would have learnt by now, coming toward the end of the proceedings, perhaps to talk to my colleagues beforehand to make sure that all. So there is a downside to me, but there's an advantage to you, because I won't use the 3-hour version. You'll just get the shorter version. So the number 70, that I will dwell on only for a moment, has a particular significance in Judaism. Pirkei Avot, Ethics of Our Fathers, teaches that when someone reaches the age of 70, they have fullness of years. It was what the rabbis considered a full life, and what better way for us to mark this wonderful occasion than celebrating the very full life of this special community. Before joining me on a brief trip down memory lane, and for those I have not met yet this afternoon, my name, as you have heard, is Andrew Ida, and I'm a trustee of the United Synagogue. Michael Goldstein, our president, sends his apologies and very best wishes, and I am delighted to be here celebrating with you all today. As United Synagogue trustees do in their spare time, I was browsing the Jewish Chronicle archives to see if there were any reports about the founding of your wonderful community. Now, everybody knows that the Jewish community here started in Oswald Road, but not everybody knows that some 7 years before the community was founded, Jewish history actually began in Oswald Road with, I am told, Lokshen. The JC of the 13th July 1934 writes that to assist the Jewish public in selecting kosher foods and boarding houses, the Joint Kashrus Committee has adopted the distinguishing mark Kadassia for foods prepared and for its establishments conducted under its supervision or to its satisfaction. And in the list of products mentioned, there's an entry which reads, noodles, Avery's Vermicelli, Oswald Road, St Albans. No one said that story so far. That's my story. You might have thought that I made it up so that nobody else would have known it. Until last night, though, and please allow me to divert just for a moment, I was not aware of my own personal links to St Albans. Firstly, it turns out that my father-in-law, Seymour Sageman, happened to register my wife's birth here at your local registry office in 1966, whilst undertaking, by coincidence, a routine annual accountancy audit of, guess what, Avery's Vermicelli. And secondly, and I think I might have put 2 and 2 together with the talk earlier, secondly, about 25 years later, and as a former president of the United Synagogue, Seymour spoke here at a special civic service, which might have been your 60th anniversary of the community in the mid-1990s. So back to the JC and my searching for links to St Albans. Not long after the community was founded, your Lady Guild was formed. The JC of 4th April 1941 says that a ladies' guild has been formed in St Albans to undertake charitable work in connection with the synagogue, and to assist local war appeal efforts. The Guild also hopes to form a social centre for the younger members of the community. And then the JC of 24th March 1950, and I apologise, we've heard this already, the foundation stone of the St Albans Synagogue in Oswald Road was laid by Mr. Louis Laholt. Diane Harris Lazarus gave the address at the service, attended by about 300, which was conducted by Reverend Chaitovitz and assisted by the children's choir. An appeal for the building fund was made by the senior warden and chairman of the board at the time, Mr. Jack Harris. As you all know better than I, the key change for St Albans was the transition from the membership group of Blitz evacuees to the membership group of current St Albans members who make up your community today. In the 1940s, many people were forced to leave London due to the Blitz, but today people join St Albans voluntarily. And they're joining, maybe not, and they're joining in record numbers under the dedicated leadership of your joint chairs, Elisa da Costa Wellman and Daniel Agassi, supported by a wider team of committed volunteers. St Albans United Synagogue is going from strength to strength, and on behalf of the United Synagogue, I thank you all for what you do. Chief Rabbi, it's a great honor to have you here with us today. I know that you have a very busy day today with your morning commitments and also later on. So thank you for this and also for your leadership. And it's a privilege for us to be able to work closely with you through your office. Let me end by paying tribute to your extraordinary Rabbi and Rebbitzin. After a rabbinic absence of nearly half a century, Rabbi and Rebbitzin Sturgis have put St Albans firmly back on the map. Thanks to Rabbi and Rebbitzin Sturgis, St Albans Synagogue is growing in numbers, engaging more members, and enabling more Jews to do more Jewish things. Every member matters. Whether you're here every week or just a few times a year, the Sturgises care about each and every one of you and want to see you and to spend time with you. They have an knack of making everyone feel welcome, and I pay tribute to them and their wonderful family. Thank you. On behalf of my LC President of the United Synagogue and my fellow trustees, together with Dr. Stephen Wilson, Chief Executive, and all the professional staff, I thank you all for being here today and for supporting us in St United Synagogue. We can't wait to see what your community achieves in the next 70 years. Mazel tov and thank you. Okay, good afternoon. Firstly, I know you haven't listened to everybody else this afternoon. I'm Daniel Agassi, co-chair of the synagogue. I hope you were great and a great afternoon. As I mentioned, we joined St Albans about 5 years ago, and we welcomed wholeheartedly into this wonderfully warm community. But don't get more W words in. And we are really enjoying it heartily. There has been a lot of hard work in getting to stay up early, so there are 70 people at that time. So our 70th anniversary committee, Jeanette Grimley, Karen Appleby, Vivian Howard Joseph, Leslie Marks from Clara. We also co-opted the help of lots of other people, Ian Rothstein, Keith and Ed Appleby, Barbara Tolson, Vivian Morris, Will Grubner, David Grace, and other members of the Shul Council. Thank you all very much for making this afternoon so special. It's to see for being here this afternoon. And I haven't forgotten Harry here. Harry's deserves a special mention in helping to get the videos, pictures, and presentation together, as well as being in charge of the live streaming. So thank you to everyone who agreed to be interviewed for the presentation.
I would like to say it's a privilege, it has been today, to be joined by our Chief Rabbi, Stefan Lewis, United Synagogue Trustee Andrew Leader, Chief Executive of United Synagogue Stephen Wilson, and Minister of Women's Council. Thank you all very much for agreeing to attend this afternoon. And of course, a special thank you to Daniel, St Ali, for the tremendous amount of work you do for our community, and for making St Albans United Synagogue what it is today. Finally, thank you to all of our members and special guests who are here with us today, and we hope you thoroughly enjoyed the afternoon. This section, again, just to reiterate, the marketing and contractual team got the answer there, also say home, those big bags that you can put in, so please take them as part of it. Finally, just saying that there is a short time of service after the proceedings this afternoon, for those who have to participate. And thank you, everyone, for coming. Have a safe journey back.